Welcome back. I need to share something with you that nobody talks about openly. Have you ever noticed how some guys can treat relationships casually and somehow maintain deep connections, while others pour their entire soul into making things work and still watch everything fall apart? There's a reason for that, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. This isn't about being a jerk or playing games. This is about understanding what actually creates lasting connection versus what quietly destroys it. Let me start with a question. What do you think keeps two people together over time? Most of us were raised with a simple formula. Treat someone well, show up consistently, be kind and generous, and the relationship will naturally thrive. Sounds logical, right? The problem is, human connection doesn't follow logic. It follows something much deeper and often invisible. Here's what I've observed after years of watching relationships succeed and fail. The couples that last aren't necessarily the ones where one person gives the most. They're the ones where both people feel something specific when they're together. That feeling is hard to describe, but you know it when it's there. It's that sense of being fully alive, challenged, respected, and genuinely seen. When that feeling exists, people stay. When it fades, they drift, no matter how much effort is being applied. Think about someone you deeply respect in your life. It could be a mentor, a friend, or even someone you've only met briefly. Why do you respect them? Chances are it's not because they did favors for you or tried really hard to impress you. You respect them because of who they are, how they carry themselves, how they respond under pressure. That quality, that presence is what draws people in and keeps them close. Now, let's flip this around. Think about someone who constantly seeks your approval. Someone who's always asking if everything's okay, who apologizes excessively, who seems to need reassurance that you still like them. How does that make you feel about them? If you're honest, it probably makes you uncomfortable. Not because they're bad people, but because that constant need for validation creates an imbalance. It subtly communicates that they don't believe in their own value, so they're asking you to provide it for them. This dynamic shows up everywhere, but it's especially destructive in romantic relationships. A man might believe he's building security by constantly checking in, always being available, never saying no, and prioritizing his partner's needs above everything else. On the surface, this seems loving, but beneath the surface, something else is happening. He's slowly eroding the very thing that attracted her in the first place. Women, like all humans, are drawn to authenticity and strength. Not strength in the sense of dominance or control, but strength as in someone who knows themselves, trusts themselves, and doesn't crumble when things get uncertain. When a man starts operating from fear, when every action is designed to prevent her from leaving, that fear becomes the dominant energy in the relationship. And fear is the opposite of attraction. I've watched this pattern play out countless times. A relationship starts with excitement and balance. Both people have their own lives, interests, and identities. Then, gradually, one person begins to collapse inward. They start measuring their worth by how the other person responds to them. They become hyper-focused on avoiding conflict, on keeping things smooth, on making sure nothing goes wrong. And ironically, this is exactly when things start going wrong. Here's the thing. Connection isn't built through perfection. It's built through realness. When you're constantly managing someone else's emotions, when you're walking on eggshells, when you're sacrificing your own needs to keep the peace, you're not being real. You're performing. And people can sense performance even if they can't articulate it. It creates distance, not closeness. Let me share something personal. I once knew a guy who was in a relationship with someone he absolutely adored. He was the definition of a good partner. Thoughtful gifts, constant communication, planning trips, always putting her first. On paper, he was doing everything right. But over time, she became more distant. She started spending more time with friends, seemed distracted, less enthusiastic. He responded by doing more. More gestures, more questions about what was wrong, more attempts to fix whatever invisible problem he assumed existed. What he didn't realize was that the problem wasn't something he could fix with more effort. The problem was the effort itself. By constantly trying to secure her feelings, he was communicating that he didn't trust the relationship to stand on its own. He was signaling insecurity. And insecurity, no matter how well-intentioned, creates doubt. Eventually, she ended things. Not because he wasn't good enough, not because he did anything terrible, but because the emotional dynamic had shifted into something that felt suffocating. She couldn't explain it clearly because she didn't fully understand it herself. She just knew that something essential had disappeared. Now, contrast that with another scenario. A different man in a different relationship. This guy had clear boundaries. He loved his partner deeply, but he also had his own life. He had hobbies she wasn't involved in, friendships he maintained independently, goals he pursued regardless of her opinion. When conflicts arose, he didn't panic. He listened, expressed his perspective calmly, and didn't apologize for things he didn't believe were wrong. He wasn't trying to control her or prove anything. He was just being himself. Consistently, that relationship thrived, not because he was perfect, but because there was mutual respect. She didn't feel like she had to manage his emotions. He didn't feel like he had to earn her affection. They both showed up as whole people, and that created space for genuine connection. So what's the difference between these two situations? It comes down to internal versus external validation. The first guy was seeking validation from outside himself. His sense of worth was tied to how his partner felt about him. The second guy had internal validation. He valued himself independently of anyone else's opinion, which paradoxically made him more valuable to others. This isn't about being selfish or disconnected. It's about having a solid foundation within yourself so that your relationships can be about connection rather than need. When you need someone to feel okay about yourself, you're not offering partnership, you're offering dependence. And dependence feels like a burden, not a gift. Think about the qualities you admire in anyone, romantic or otherwise. Confidence, clarity, calmness under pressure, integrity. These aren't things people do. They're things people are. You can't fake them long term. They come from a deep sense of self-respect and self-knowledge. And they're magnetic because they're rare. Most people, if they're honest, spend a lot of energy managing how others perceive them. They adjust their behavior based on reactions. They avoid difficult conversations. They say yes when they mean no. They hide parts of themselves they fear won't be accepted. This is normal, but it's also exhausting. And it prevents real intimacy. Real intimacy requires vulnerability, but vulnerability doesn't mean weakness. It means showing up as you actually are, with your boundaries intact, your values clear, and your self-respect non-negotiable. When you do that, you give others permission to do the same. And that's when deep connection becomes possible. Here's a truth that's hard to swallow. You cannot control whether someone stays or leaves. You can influence it through your actions, but ultimately, other people make their own choices based on their own feelings and needs. Trying to control the outcome through excessive effort or people-pleasing doesn't work. It just makes you smaller. What does work is focusing on who you're becoming. Are you growing? Are you challenging yourself? Are you living according to your values? Are you treating yourself with the same respect you're trying to earn from others? These questions matter more than any relationship technique or strategy. When you prioritize your own development, something interesting happens. You become less desperate for external approval. You stop tolerating disrespect because you respect yourself too much. You stop over-functioning in relationships because you trust that the right people will meet you halfway. And this shift in energy changes everything. People often confuse love with attachment. Love is about appreciation, care, and genuine regard for someone's well-being. Attachment is about needing someone to feel complete. Love is generous. Attachment is demanding. Love creates space. Attachment clings. You can love someone deeply while also being completely fine if they choose to leave. That's not coldness, that's freedom. When you operate from love rather than attachment, relationships become lighter. There's less pressure, less anxiety, less second guessing. You're not constantly analyzing every interaction for signs of approval or rejection. You're just present, engaged, and authentic. And that presence is what people remember and value. Now, let's talk about momentum because this is crucial. Stagnation kills attraction faster than almost anything else. When someone stops evolving, when they settle into complete comfort and routine, something vital disappears. It's not about constantly chasing success or never being satisfied. It's about maintaining curiosity, purpose, and forward motion in life. Think about someone you used to admire who lost that quality over time. What changed? Probably not their circumstances, but their energy. They stopped pursuing anything meaningful. They stopped learning, growing, challenging themselves, and as a result, they became less interesting, less inspiring, less magnetic. This applies to everyone, but it's especially important in romantic dynamics. When a man stops pursuing his own excellence, when he becomes entirely focused on the relationship as his primary source of meaning, the relationship itself suffers. Not because ambition is more important than love, but because a person without direction is difficult to respect long term. Direction doesn't mean you have to be wildly successful or constantly busy. It means you have something you care about beyond just maintaining comfort. You're moving towards something, learning something, building something. That energy is attractive because it's alive. Comfort is safe, but it's not exciting. And while relationships need safety, they also need vitality. Here's another layer. How you handle difficulty reveals your character more than how you handle success. Everyone can be pleasant when things are going well. But what happens when conflict arises? When plans fall apart? When emotions run high? Do you stay grounded or do you fall apart? The ability to remain calm and centered during challenges is incredibly rare and valuable. It's not about suppressing emotions or pretending everything's fine. It's about not being controlled by circumstances. It's about responding thoughtfully rather than reacting impulsively. This quality builds trust because it shows reliability under pressure. Most people react. They get defensive, emotional, chaotic when things don't go their way. And while that's understandable, it's also destabilizing. When someone knows you'll stay solid regardless of what happens, they feel safe with you in a profound way. That safety creates loyalty that effort alone never could. Let me be clear about something. None of this means you should be emotionally distant or unavailable. Emotional strength isn't about being unaffected. It's about being affected without being controlled. You can care deeply, feel intensely, and still maintain your center. That combination is powerful. There's also this phenomenon where people test each other, usually unconsciously. Someone might pull back slightly, become a bit colder, create some distance. This isn't usually calculated manipulation. It's an instinctive way of checking if the other person will panic or remain stable. And how you respond to these tests determines a lot about how the relationship evolves. If you chase, if you become anxious and start questioning everything, you fail the test. Not because there's something wrong with caring, but because that reaction signals insecurity. It shows that your emotional state depends entirely on their behavior. But if you remain unchanged, if you give them space without becoming distant yourself, something shifts, the respect deepens. This requires emotional maturity that most people don't develop. It requires trusting that if someone wants to leave, letting them go is better than convincing them to stay. It requires believing that you're valuable enough that the right person won't need to be chased. And it requires being okay with being alone rather than compromising your self-respect. So what does all this mean practically? It means stop trying to prove your worth. Stop overgiving to earn affection. Stop being available every second to show you care. Stop sacrificing your needs to avoid conflict. These behaviors don't create security. They create imbalance. Instead, focus on building a life you're genuinely proud of. Pursue goals that matter to you. Maintain friendships and interests outside any relationship. Set clear boundaries and honor them. Speak honestly even when it's uncomfortable. Value yourself enough that you don't tolerate being treated poorly. These aren't relationship strategies. They're principles for living with integrity. When you live this way, something remarkable happens. The right people are naturally drawn to you, and the wrong people naturally filter themselves out. You stop wasting energy trying to convince anyone of your value because your value is evident in how you live, and the connections you form are based on mutual respect rather than need. This doesn't guarantee that relationships will never end or that you'll never experience pain, but it does guarantee that you'll never lose yourself in the process. And that's worth more than any relationship that requires you to become smaller to maintain it. The truth is simple, even if it's not easy. People stay connected to those who enhance their lives, not those who depend on them for validation. Be someone who adds value through your presence, your growth, your strength. Be someone who doesn't need others to feel complete but chooses connection from a place of abundance rather than scarcity. This shift changes everything. Relationships become partnerships between equals rather than transactions based on fear. Conflicts become opportunities for understanding rather than threats to security. And loyalty emerges naturally from mutual respect and admiration rather than obligation or guilt. Stop measuring your worth by someone else's response. Start measuring it by whether you're living according to your own standards. The rest will follow.